Hello, everyone, and welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Hal Levinka, and I'm the event director of the bookstore, and I'm thrilled today to be collaborating again with our friends at New Directions and to welcome Forrest Gander for the release of his new poetry collection, Twice Alive, in conversation with Elisa Gabbert. While the pandemic has taken a toll across all of our lives, virtual programs like the one you're about to see have become bright spots in our days, and I want to give a huge thanks to our guests for joining us tonight. So to some housekeeping, you should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they cannot see or hear you. So if you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button here at the bottom of the screen to submit them. We will try to get through as many of those as we can at the end of the program. There's also a chat button here through which I'll be posting a link to purchase tonight's book, very important. A caveat for tonight's event and for all virtual events, we are all at the mercy of our home internet connections and server loads. So please bear with any technical issues that could arise. We will try to solve them quickly. And finally, we've scheduled a whole host of late spring programming heading into the summer. So head over to our website and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out, next Thursday, our NYRB series continues as we welcome Rachel Eisendrath for the release of her new book-length essay, Gallery of Clouds, in conversation with the writer Hisham Matar. That program is on our website now and taking registrations. So now a little about tonight's guests, and we will get started. Forrest Gander, born in the Mojave Desert, lives in California. A translator and writer with degrees in geology and literature, he's the recipient of numerous awards, among them the Pulitzer Prize for his collection Be With, the Best Translated Book Award, and fellowships from the Library of Congress, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, and United States Artists. And Elisa Gabbert is the author of 5 collections of poetry, essays, and criticism, most recently The Unreality of Memory and Other Essays, and The Word Pretty. She writes a regular poetry column for the New York Times, and her work has appeared recently in Harper's, the New York Review of Books, A Public Space, and American Poetry Review, among other places. Her next book of poems, Normal Distance, will be out from Soft Skull in 2022. So, Forrest and Elisa, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Hal. Forrest, do you want to kick it off with a poem?
Okay, I will. If you promise to read a poem after me.
I will.
One of the pleasures of, I'm excited to be able to talk with you, sort of cross-discipline writer, and whose work in both genres I really like. So this is the first poem in my book. It was written I read it now to honor the people who lost people during the pandemic, as I lost my mother during the pandemic. Obeyed. Can you hear dawn edging close? Hear soft light with its vacuum fingertips gripping the bedroom wall? An understated what? Exhilaration? Can you hear the voices, if they can be called voices, of towies scratching in the garden, and then the creaky, low, husky voice flecked with sleep beside you in bed, telling a dream slowly, as though in real time. And now, interrupting that dream, can you make out the voice, if it can be called a voice, of absence speaking intimately to you, directly, using the names of those who are vulnerable, those who are gone? I know you must feel it you must hear it feelingly, a low vibration in your bones, for don't you find yourself absorbed in the next moment beyond your given life?
That was beautiful. I've been really excited about this. I'm a big fan of yours. So I was so thrilled when I got sent this book in the mail a little early. I felt like I was cheating.
That's
So this book that I just finished and that's coming out next year, I started it a few years ago. It's been called Normal Distance in my mind for a while. I called it that before the pandemic started, actually. And then when everybody was talking about distance all the time, at first I was like, oh God, I have to change the name. But then I decided, no, of course I can't change the name. So I wrote a lot of these poems before the pandemic, but I wrote a lot of them actually last year during the pandemic. And I always remember the ones that I wrote like last summer, when it just really felt like we were in the thick of it. Like, you know, summer always feels thick, but it was just like this kind of feeling of, oh God, like we're going to be in this for a while. So yeah, I'm gonna read one of those. These are quite short. This is called The Vagueness of the Moment. I saw a dead bunny in the grass, all bloody and ravaged, first by a dog or a hawk, and now covered in ants. I stopped to look at it, but did not photograph it. There's no time for mourning. The deaths fall into the void of unceremony and become one death. It's not some monolith, they say about everything, but everything is a monolith, a wave that never collapses. I play an 8-hour track of rain sounds on windows all day on a loop. The sky is too high, and I want to feel crushed. The vagueness of the moment has a crispness in memory, like mountains from a distance.
That's kind of exemplary of your technique in both poetry and actually in your essays too, that you can talk about unreality or vagueness with so much crispness, with so much particularity.
That's a great compliment. Yeah, I think my essays and poetry are converging more and more in just in their formal attributes. Can I ask you a question about the form of that poem you just read, Obeyed? Just making sure this is one of the poems with the dots. I have a question about the dots, which I'm fascinated by because I don't know, I just love how poets use punctuation, and I love whenever poets kind of either make a punctuation mark their own or sort of invent one to some extent. Like I always think of Alice Fulton's a double equal sign, or more recently Benjamin Garcia, his debut Thrown in the Throat. Have you read that one? It has these like double slashes that are used in a sort of similar way that your dots are, where it's almost like an intra line break. So it kind of creates breaks within the line. And I felt like those were in conversation. And I think there's some really interesting kind of syntactical ambiguities that are created by those dots. And so I wonder, like, how did you find that? What do you call it?
Yeah, I don't have a name for it, but thinking of other people who use syntax or typography in a really exploratory way. Brenda Hillman comes to mind, and Jory Graham recently in works has really worked with typology and with punctuation. This is more modest than their methods and is partly used to break iambic pentameter, to leave it sort of gasping at the place where it would be fulfilling itself, as a way of staggering the reading, staggering the breath of the reader, so that we pause, we stumble over an area that is an absence because some of these poems, like that one, are concerned with what's absent or with what's separated in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes me think too of Thresholds by Laura Mimosa Montez, who has these typographical kind of space markers. They're just circles or holes, kind of in between all these fragments, and it is this kind of signage almost, like on what would be just nothing if it was a line break, just white space. Instead, it's putting something there, and it has that strange feeling of like it's something but it's nothing. Like, how do you read it?
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. No, so some of these poems, when I read them, I actually try to make a noise that a beat that also sort of sonically imitates that.
Yeah. What were you just doing there? Were you stamping your foot or hitting the table?
Hitting the table. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Well, you were writing about plague back in 2018. What memo did you get that the rest of us didn't get until later?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just, especially during the like 2015 to 2017 period, it was some kind of breaking point for me and many people I know, just in terms of sort of like, I mean, for years and years and years, people have been predicting apocalypse, right? Of course. And certainly different forms were more like salient during the Cold War, but there was just something about that time where it felt like the world is going to end soon, one way or another. Like it was just, everything just seemed so acute. And so, yeah, I would do a lot of reading about like, well, which of these looming disasters is the most likely to destroy us first. It was like sort of a strange kind of comfort reading to read about, like, real probabilities and like what should I be afraid of? Are there some things that I like have free-floating anxiety about that I can put out of my mind because those are less likely to kill me in the next 5 to 20 years? Yeah, and so one of them was like plagues and pandemics. It was just something that I found really, really fascinating, and that was just pure bad luck that I happened to have a book with an essay about pandemics come out during a pandemic. I was not expecting that one.
It seemed like good luck in a way. I mean, it was what people wanted to read about.
Yeah.
Then there is that weird way that your reading habits are so wide that you'll reference there a geologist, a philosopher, a choose your own adventure in disaster child's book. And I was just talking with a poet, a California poet named Molly Bendel, and we were both really admiring the kind of way that you seem so at ease in material that it's almost like improvisatory, that you're pulling from all these directions, high culture, low culture. And we were talking about how difficult it is to make that seem so smooth and so integrated into your tone.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That is totally just me being, having like an attention deficit where anything that grabs my eye, like I'm about to start going to the library again, which I'm very excited about. I haven't gone to a library in about a year, but my favorite thing used to be going to the library and just seeing what was on the displays, like what's on the new books table, or even better, the recently returned table is my absolute favorite, because that's just like old books from anywhere in the library, and you could find something super fascinating that you never would have thought to look for. So yeah, that just tends to be what makes my mind feel most alive. And when I like have an idea for a poem or an essay, it's often something I just happen to run across. And then like once I'm thinking about that, everything just feels related to it. It's very like agglomerative. But I also, I wanted to ask you, before you started around too much on me, how you came to work with this mycologist, because I love this. I love this note at the beginning. Hold on, I'm going to quote from it just a little bit. So you talk about lichen, which I recently became extremely like obsessed with trees because I read that Hidden Life of Trees book, which I know like it's a huge bestseller. Like I didn't discover that myself or anything, but I loved it. And so I've been interested in trees and lichen as well. And so there's this note where you talk about their like theoretical immortality, and how they reproduce, the idea of merging. You have that great Whitman line, who need be afraid of the merge, which I love. But so yeah, you say that some of these poems were written in collaboration or kind of based off collaboration with a mycologist, Anne Pringle. And so I just wanted to hear more about that. Like, how did you start working with her? And can you say more about merging?
Yeah. Well, Anne Pringle is a wonder, and people who read the New York Times have probably read her articles on fungi and lichen. She teaches. She was at Harvard. Now she's up at University of Wisconsin. I was invited by the literary critic, Lynn Keller, who is really interested in helping to articulate an ethical understanding of the thoroughness of our interrelation with other species, to participate also with an artist, with a photographer, with some graduate students in both science and literature, to go to a research area of really pristine forests. It's a really unusual site along the Great Lake, and we looked at mushrooms and lichen, and Anne educated us, and we spent several days there, and then took everything back, and so it was the first time I spent. I grew up as one of three children of a mother who was a full-time elementary school teacher. So there was a lot of free time, and I was in Virginia, where I spent most of my childhood in the woods. And I thought I was very attentive to like creatures and trees and stuff, but I had no idea how many mushrooms are around us all the time. And educated me about that. And one of the things that I came to be very interested in was the weirdness of lichen, which people still, even the scientists, they argue a lot about. They don't really know what lichen is. It's, some kind of fungus that gets together with algae or cyanobacteria, but then there are actually a lot of other elements also involved. And the weird thing is that the fungi and the cyanobacteria or algae, when they decide as if they had agency, when they come together, they're utterly transformed. They can't ever go back to what they were. They change into a symbiotic unit that acts differently than either did on its own. And that made me think of human intimacy and how we are filled out with otherness when it penetrates us. And so the thinking of this whole book is around kinds of intimacy, ecological intimacy and human intimacy.
Would you read one of the poems from that series?
Sure. Okay. So I'll read a poem called Forest with one R, and it's also I'm combining again the sort of interest in mutualism and lichen with a form of poetry that comes from southern India between 300 and 300 BC, 300 AD. Called it was the great period of Sangam literature, and we'll talk about the Akam poems. But so these are all titled after one of five particular landscapes particular to southern India, and that also happen to be the same five landscapes very particular to where I live in Northern California. Forest. Erogenous zones in oaks slung with stoles of lace lichen, the sun's rays spilling through leaves in broken packets. A force, called it nighttime, thrusts mushrooms up from their lair of spawn, mycelial loam, the whiff of port. They pop into untrammeled air with a sort of gasp that follows a fine chess move. Like memories, are they? Or punctuation? Was it something the earth said to provoke our response, tasking us to recall an evolutionary course, our long ago initiation into the one among others? And within my newborn noticing, have you popped up beside me, love? Or were you here from the start, a swarm of meaning and decay, still gripping the underworld, both of us half buried, holding fast, if briefly, to a swelling vastness, while our coupling begins to register in the already awake compendium that offers to take us in. You take me in, and abundance floods us, floats us out. We fill each with the other all morning, breaks as birdsong over us, who rise to the surface, so our faces might be sprung.
All right, so I'm going to read a nature poem as well, and then I'm going to ask you about Sangam poetics and just like the particular approach to nature, because I found that really interesting. Okay, this is called The Idea of a Meadow. I've become obsessed with the idea of a meadow I am not in. Yellow flowers are in the meadow. They must be. They are part of my idea of a meadow. There is the yellow on green below, the flowers in the grass, the white on blue above. My viewpoint is in the middle, though I'm not in the meadow. It forms a white line extending out to the horizon, a line that is real in the real of the meadow. When the meadow is real, so is the line. You can think of the meadow as kind, but the meadow is indifferent to human life, even to mine, even my meadow. My meadow with day moon and trickling stream, rabbit and magpie. White wisp of cloud, white snow on the mountain, the meadow a valley. There is cloud wisp and flowers, but they are not for me when the meadow is real. I'm not in the meadow. The meadow is not mine.
Yay! My meadow is not mine. And that's something else that you've been really interested in your work is perspective, and watching that poem in L'Or Bleu about everyone seems to be glancing, looking to be watched, where the watchers are the ones being watched. Or yeah, I mean, you do that a lot with perspective.
I'm so happy that you read that book. I feel like nobody has read that book.
Everyone's reading that book.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I am super interested in perspective and just kind of a constant, like almost telescoping of scale. Like it's sort of a question of like, just how do we think about our lives? How do we experience our lives? It's so hard to sort of like stay present and small and in the moment when like we're always seeing this big picture stuff and you know, being forced to contemplate the near and the deep future, you know, just particularly with like just I think, you know, climate change has really changed poetry, I think, in the past really the past 20 years. Like obviously we've known about it for much longer, but I just don't think that poetry really felt the impact until recently. So I guess I have a couple of questions for you that are sort of related to climate change, but I did want to start by talking about that afterword by in Manu Chakravarti in Twice Alive, who's talking about Sangam poetics and how they influenced you. And there's a few lines in there about nature, and I just have a few quotes here. Nature corresponds with the inner landscape of the individual. The exterior precisely relates to the one who beholds it. There's an internalization of the exterior landscape. I really like these ideas. They're kind of like, they feel like the idealized version of like the pathetic fallacy, which I think is sort of unfortunately named because I've always liked the pathetic fallacy. And I actually, it reminded me also of this Jory Graham conversation I just listened to a week or so ago. I don't know if you've heard it yet, but David Naiman interviewed her for it.
I did, yes, yeah.
Yeah, it was so good. And she was talking about like attention and the sensorial experience of nature and how it's almost like something that we owe to the world because like the world as we know it is dying. And so, you know, we have to represent it in all its specificity. So yeah, this is totally my style as a conversationalist. It's just like more of a comment than a question, but I really just want you to talk a little bit about Sangam poetics and, you know, how it influenced this book.
Well, and I think I'll pick it up from your poem and the notion that that life is perspectival and that reality appears from different angles, and that it's made most abundant through an abundance of views. One of the things that studying geology taught me is sort of the play of perspectives that you picked up without having to study geology. In geology, you're constantly looking both at microscopic structures, crystalline structures through microscopes of shear zones, but then you also have to look at the large scale pattern of the folding and fault and what, you know, where the shear is in the cliff or the mountain face. So you're moving back and forth constantly, which is something that you do. And I think that's part of the problem with the way that climate change has been treated. And Joan Rotalick writes really well about this, about how the language of the environmental movement has mostly relied on argument, on ethos and logos, and that we need to expand the ways that we talk about this. And that's where poets can come in. I think that's another perspective, that we need lots of perspectives to make people feel the realness of it. And the Sangam poetry, they were onto this, you know, 2,000 years ago, onto thinking that the emotion that takes place never takes place outside of a place, that you don't think, therefore you are, because you're already in relationship. And that, one of the great first popularizers, translators, is this of the Sangam poetry, is A.K. Ramanujan. And he says in another book, in his translation of the Hymns of Drowning, that in the Sangam poetry, the signifier is a particular landscape, and the signified is human love. So that situating of human emotion in place, again, gets to that interrelationship that Lynn Keller was talking about, that I mentioned early on, and in what I'm interested in exploring in this book.
I wonder if this would be a good time for that video.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great. Hal, can you pull that up?
I do have like a plan here.
Was I muted?
No, I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, let me restart that. Sorry, first try. Here we go.
Unto ourselves, to see what's there and not already patterned by familiarity. For an unpredicted whole is there, casting a pair of shadows, manipulating its material, advancing, assembling enough kinship that we call it life, our life, what is already many lives, the dimensions of its magnitude veiled to us as we live it. Across the cytoplasm of adjacent cells goes a signal that turns you toward me, turns me into you. We are coupled in quiet tumult, convergent arguments, an alien rhythm becoming familiar, a rhythm of I am here, never to be peeled away. We are become one thing, listening, for what's there and not. Through the storm, neem trees on the hill stamp wildly in their roots. We have passed through the spring, but what thing has passed through us? Now your laughter transparentizes me, and whose sense of the self doesn't swerve? Your unconditional foreignness grows conditional, stops being foreign at all. With your nearness, my lens on the world shifts. A peristaltic contraction courses through us as a single wave. No longer can we keep our distance, our lips brush, or the tips of ourselves. But what language are you whispering to me, your teeth stained by Nilgiri tea, above the trills and whistles in the high limbs, above the screech of a bulldozer blade, shoving rubble up the wounded street, above the silence of an eyeless tick climbing a grass stem? I understand nothing but the lust your voice incites, the declamatory tenderness. How and who can say what force has queued up this hour for our small voices to merge into a carnality that did not exist before now? Come to this unforeseen conjunction. We slip into one another. We take hold in a pulse of heat, in a yes and no, for already we can see we are no longer what we were. As I find you within me, not fused, not bonded, but lodged. And for you, is it the same? The intensity of such investment, each of us excited by the volatility of the other, which propels us in a rush as something, perhaps our lips brush or the tips of ourselves, stripping away what was before? Was there even anything before? The reconfiguration is instantaneous experience. It is being itself. But whose being now? Was I endowed with some special pliability so that becoming part of you, I didn't pass through my own nihilation? And what does the death of who you were mean to me, except that now you are present constantly? Because excess is what it took for us to transform, to effulge. You cast your life beyond itself. Can't you sense me with your ecstatic openness, like rain mingling with red earth? Without you, I survived, and with you, I live again in a radical augmentation of identity, because we have effaced our outer limits, because we summoned each other. In you, I cast my life beyond itself.
Got a little garbled there, but thank you. Thank you, Hal.
No problem. And I'm also going to post the link to that in the chat so that everybody can watch it in a smoother fashion on their own computer.
All right.
So I have a question that's, I don't know, maybe kind of intense, maybe not, whatever, we can handle intensity. First, I'll read a poem that is maybe sort of related, and then I'll ask my question. So this is called Random Assignment. It seems to want to rain, but can't. It fades to pink, an argument. Relinquish the dream. You can't ever get what you want. You can't please any of the people, any of the time. Time just lies there, not fast or slow, any more than a line. I wonder if the very small ants are afraid of the big ants, if they ever cross paths. I wonder if happiness is ethical. I'd like to do it all again in silence now, in darkness, a wasp in a fig.
That's it with the wasp and the fig. Again, going from ethics to, the bigness to the particularity.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And that's, you talk about how the glut of news makes it hard to live an ethical life. I think for you and for me also, it's in turning to the particular, that thing that I had in my earlier book, Be With, that the political begins in intimacy. It's the fig.
Yeah. Oh, Be With is so wonderful. I love that book so much. Yeah, so there was a line in, I believe it's the poem Post-Fire Forest, which, I don't know, it's so funny, the poems with forests. It's like a little guzzle trick. There's a line where you say, "You have, everyone notes, a rare talent for happiness. I wonder how to value that walking through wreckage." And that just feels like, oh God, that's this like kind of concern that I return to again and again recently, which is sort of like, what is the value of happiness? You know, like, do we deserve to be happy? That's a question that I ask myself a lot and go back and forth on. And just sort of like, what is the right way to feel at the end of the world, you know? And that's sort of where I feel like it becomes almost this crisis point for poetry, like this question of, you know, it's very like Adorno-esque, like, does it make sense to write poetry when we're living in a climate crisis? Does it make sense to ask that question? Because clearly we're doing it, you know, we're doing it anyway. We are writing poetry. So I guess it does make sense. Yeah, so again, like, this is just something that obsesses me. I don't know if you've come to some kind of like stable philosophy about it, or if you just circle around and around it like I do.
So I circle around, but I look for, you know, I look for wisdom from other people. Jack Gilbert has that great poem called A Brief for the Defense, where it's really the defense of happiness in the face of overwhelming misery. And he says, of course, you can't paraphrase a poem. That's what makes poetry poetry. And I can't quote it, but I can point people to it. And basically, the semantic value is that he's saying that if you give up your capacity to be happy because of the huge draw on it, the leech of the world. Shakespeare says, "World, world, oh world, but that thy strange mutations make us hate thee. Life would not yield to age." Gilbert says, if you give up your happiness, you let all of that misery win. And I was living in a lot of wreckage after CD's death, and I met someone who does have this amazing capacity for happiness, and it has me wondering how to be in the world.
Yeah, I did actually feel like the pandemic kind of changed my mind. I feel like when I was writing my last book, The Unreality of Memory, I had this this very self-punishing instinct. Like, I was more on the side of we don't deserve to be happy. But yeah, over the past year, I felt this kind of like desperate defensiveness instead of, like, you know, my right to feel pleasure. And yeah, it was just a very present realization that, like, I do only have one life and this is it, and it's getting shorter.
Yeah.
So it was clarifying in that way.
Speaking of the unreality of memory, have you happened to read The Memory of Memory by Maria Stepanova?
No, I've had that recommended to me. I do want to read it.
I think you'll like it.
Yeah.
Because she's also someone who's using archives a lot and thinking about memory and where memory disappears and what happens then. It's a beautiful work. I haven't read her poetry, but she's someone I want to read some more.
Yeah. Those poet essayists.
Yeah. She's got a good translator too. Her translator is a wonderful UK poet named Sasha Dugdale.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to look for that. I bet you are probably the third or fourth person to recommend that book to me. So we do have some good audience questions that I want to make time for. So I wonder if we should each read one more poem and then go to these questions.
Yeah, sure. This is called Immigrant Sea. It's for Ashwini Bhatt. Aroused by her inaccessibility, he aches for more of her life to live inside him, watching the breakers, standing so close he can feel heat coming off her wet scalp. What is his relation to this person before him, so familiar and foreign? The way he searches out her face, he searches out himself. Gusts thrash crests of swell, spring grasses twirl circles in the sand where they stand without speaking. She wants him to know it's all charged, even grass, positive, pollen, negative. So when grass waves, it sweeps the air for pollen. He feels electricity all around, as though the wild drama of the coming storm were already aware of them, foreigners on this shore. Little sapphire blue flowers speckle the dunes. He wonders if he has let himself flatten out into a depthless sheet like escalator stairs, whether in the end he'll disappear underground without the smallest lurch of resistance. But when her lavish face turns toward him, beaming, the corners of her eyes wind wet, he yields to that excess. He reappears to himself.
I underlined that escalator line when I was reading your book. I love that one. So I'm going to riff a little on the foreign and familiar with this poem, I think. So this is called Awake and Alone.
Good.
Am I in the wrong history? I thought in a dream where I watched an instant replay with a contrary outcome to the one I'd just witnessed. But the replay in the dream was as real as the dream. When I'm only alone, asleep, I try to reach aloneness through sleep. Being alone is first position. The other day, alone in a room with my friend Mike, he said, "What are you doing this weekend?" And after a pause, I said, "Who, me?" The weird part was he didn't even think it was weird. It is so much easier to sit and think in a bar alone than at home. In a bar where I am not alone, I can remember every thought I've ever thought, and they come back to me as thoughts, as real as the dream. But now I am awake, now that I am finally alone.
So it seems like there are a number of poems in this new collection that sort of have a form of sort of cycling back, going to the end that sort of cycles back towards the beginning.
Yeah, there's a lot of repetition. Right, which is probably just about my obsessive state of mind in recent years.
There also, I mean, that poem is also sort of emblematic of what you do. It sounds, you can be philosophical in a way that sounds just like someone talking, someone talking at a bar, or someone talking quietly to you. It has this easiness. My work is much more labored. It's like puffing and puffing and
no, but I love the laboredness of poetry. Like it's like it's good work. Yeah, well, thank you. That is wonderful to hear. I'm going to go to some of these audience questions. This is good because it does relate to this new book. So this is from David Solo. Many of your earlier books pair your poems with photographs. Does this book also have a visual art component? And how do you think about the dialogue between word and image? It does.
Yeah, Elisa has answered. It does. I have a big interest in collaboration between genres. I think it sort of models a way that I want to be in the world. Um, you know, as Elisa says, first position alone, but second position is orienting the self towards others, and so there are photographs in this book, some great photographs of redwood trees in a little sequence poem.
Yeah, the form of those poems is so interesting too. If this was a 3-hour event, I would ask you all about how those are working, but I'm gonna stick to the audio.
There's an Australian poet named Stuart Cook, who's something of an eco poet, and whose form led me to that form.
Oh, I'll have to look him up. Yeah, those are fascinating. Here's another one I really like. So this is an anonymous attendee. How do you balance the sense of beauty and wonder in your work with the subject matter, things like trauma and climate change? Feels almost like you're balancing on a bike while you pedal, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah, that's like the question. There's something you say, Elisa, about perhaps we need to make like threats, something like we need to make threats fascinating for people to, to encounter them. I don't know. I'm suspicious of beauty.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, that the thing that Breton says, that beauty will be convulsive or it will not be at all. But I'm also someone who needs beauty and who can recognize. I don't want to stop recognizing happiness or beauty or the perspectives that allow us to see the mutuality between things. And I love that our language is capacious enough to handle both turmoil and grief and something remarkable in language, which poetry makes happen.
Yeah. So it's not true that poetry makes nothing happen.
We know that. Yeah.
So here is a question from our friend Dan B. Quick.
We were just talking about you.
Yeah,
Dan.
I know. Yours must have been burning. I'm curious about the mycological, the strange nature of the mushroom, where death and life, decay and regeneration are intimate with one another. I wonder if you could speak about your sense of that odd harmony.
Well, Dan just spoke of it there. Beautiful question. In Wallace Stevens' Death is the Mother of Beauty, that part of what makes life so poignant is that it comes to an end, and that gives us the sort of exigency and necessity of choosing to do something with it. And for some religious people, they feel like they're given the sort of instructions about how to do that. And for other people, I think the ethical importance is making those choices yourself. But death is the punctuation mark on the green fuse.
Mm-hmm. From Jay Ruiz, can you talk about the role that fieldwork plays in your poetry?
A lot, and partly again from my childhood of being alone a lot and in the woods, and then being a geology major. I'm very interested in the language of science and in being out in the field and seeing things. I spend a lot of time. I was born in the desert. I've gone back to deserts all over the world because it's it's a place that you can't read about and get any sense of. You have to be in something that at first seems silent and then seems full of everything, of small nuances, movement, sounds. So
I'm also from the desert.
I've
I'm from El Paso, Texas. So
Yeah.
yeah, like, you know, I can basically walk, you know, 5 miles and I'll just be in true like sand dunes. Like you can see all the stars. It's great.
Oh, El Paso. I went to El Paso and spent a few days out in the desert with the herpetologists, the grad students and the herp teacher, Dr. Tim Johnson, I think his name was.
Oh, how cool.
And rattlesnakes for several days in the desert.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know that sound well when it's like, when it's just hot and dry and you're hiking in like the mountains and like you hear that rattle. And you can't, have you ever heard a rattlesnake like while you're out hiking or something? It's so terrifying. You can't tell where it's coming from at all. It feels like it could be from any direction.
Or inside you.
Yeah. Yes, it's the most ominous sound. Oh yeah, I love the desert. You can probably tell. Yeah, the thing that I love most about geology is the time scales. Like, of course, you probably could have guessed that, just that sense of like, you know, we don't even count. I don't know. I read an article like a year or so ago. Actually, it was probably more than that because I know that it was pre-pandemic, but it was this, I think it was a geologist talking about how like the Anthropocene is really kind of self-aggrandizing just because it's such a, it just hasn't lasted long enough yet for us to really say whether it's going to be like kind of geologically important or not. So we should like get over ourselves. I don't know. It was kind of funny. And it kind of made me feel better in a weird way.
Those kinds of grim things make you feel better.
They do.
I'm not sure they make everyone feel better.
No. Oh, here's another name I know. Like we've got all these famous people here. Andrea Zawacki. Forrest, you've been talking about intimacy, which is often a function of distance. Could you say something about your life and work as a translator in relation to intimacy?
Yeah, beautiful question. Andrew's just a fantastic writer. Those who haven't read his work really need to. He's really important to me. Well, have you done some translation too, Elisa?
Only the smallest amount. I'm just not very fluent in anything, but I've done like a few poems in Spanish and a few poems in French, and I really enjoy it. I really love reading translation. I love reading like translator's notes, probably one of my favorite genres. Yeah, a huge fan. I should do more of it.
And Drew translates from the French. So it's I mean, there's no closer reading than you do as a translator, reading someone's work that you're going to translate. And I think it involves an act of egolessness, that you have to get your ego out of the way to hear what's going on in someone else's mind, the music of their mind. And that is a spiritual intimacy of deep listening that you go through. I just finished translating a book by the great Mexican poet Corral Bracho that New Directions will bring out next year, and it's about her mother's Alzheimer's, but it's so different than the poems I wrote about my own mother's Alzheimer's, and it's full of humor and tenderness, and in translating that book, I came into different articulations of intimacies that I had but never expressed to myself, never was able to articulate for myself. That kind of thing can happen in the act of translating. A real opening of your insides, a deepening of self, and this intimate knowledge of someone else. I love that about, you were talking about dreams, a poem about dreams earlier, and thinking about how the dreams that John has told you, if something happened to John, you would be the recipient forever of something that never existed in the world except inside someone else. And what an intimate thing to carry that is.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there are certain dreams that people have told me, people I'm not even in touch with, like old friends, that for whatever reason, I still remember their dreams.
Yeah.
Like the way they told them to me.
It's so hard to remember our own.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to say one of my like very favorite things on the internet, this is just like an odd recommendation. There's this page it's just like a bunch of different translations of that Baudelaire poem to the reader. There's like 8 or 9 different translations, but all at once. So you can like compare, line to line, like all the different versions. And it's like amazing how like 9 different translators could do the same line totally different, and it's just like it just makes poetry feels so like alive and infinite to me. Like I revisit it all the time. I love it so much.
The classic book for that, I mean, it's for me, I mean, Hiroaki Sato has done that with the translation of the frog poem, the Basho's frog poem, like 100 versions of that. But Elliot Weinberger has a really classic book on translating Huang Wei, with a lot of different translations. It's just been expanded and come out again, but it's a beautiful book.
Oh God, we probably have that. Actually, my husband's a huge Elliot Weinberger fan. There's like books on you're probably like this too. I can see you have gigantic bookshelves behind you. There's books that I don't know we own until I like tell John I want to buy it. And he's like, yeah, we already have that. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at these questions again. This is from Alan Saldowski. How do you place yourself in the lineage of poets who investigate the awareness of looming environmental apocalypse with the human impulse to maintain the comforts of our existence, which are driving the environmental crises?
Could you read it one more time, Elisa?
Yeah, how do you place yourself in the lineage of poets who investigate the awareness of looming environmental apocalypse with the human impulse to maintain the comforts of our existence, which are driving the environmental crises?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to give up some of the comforts of our existence, to be honest. And but at the same time, I don't think that it's an all or nothing sort of thing, that we don't just that we can begin to make steps. We don't have to radically abandon everything at once. And I think I've been just really encouraged by the Biden administration's steps towards climate change and steps towards energy use. And I think if the country can get behind that, those changes are the kinds of changes that will make a difference. It's interesting during this pandemic that so many of us have been flying and traveling much less. And what's opened in that space for me is I've been dropping in on Zoom talks in Australia. And, there are other ways that have sort of opened up in this dearth of travel that I think we'll hang on to.
Yeah, I also want to maintain some of these new habits, which were created out of necessity. Yeah, I would love to fly less, especially because I used to have to fly a lot for work. And yeah, I hope to continue doing that less. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to my first flight. So we're at about time, but let me ask one more. This is from Luane McKinnon. Listening to Forrest again, I am struck by a quote from Renee Magritte. We always want to see what is hidden by what we see. I feel this in your marvelous poems. Thank you, deep bow. So not quite a question, but I really like that quote too. And I feel like it relates to what we've been.
Yeah, she's wonderful too. Yeah.
It feels related to what we've been talking about in terms of perspective. And yeah. So
also that the famous L. Ward quote that goes around that no one can really find a source for, that there is another world, but it is inside this one.
Yeah, plenty of hope, but not for us.
Go. Thank you so much, Elisa. I'm really glad to get to meet you this way. I hope to see you in person sometime.
I hope so too. I'm sure we'll cross paths. And thank you so much. This is so beautiful. Congratulations on this wonderful book.
Yeah, Forrest, congratulations so much. This has really been lovely. The poetry events, they're the best. We just need to do more. New Directions. Come on.
Yeah.
Otherwise, with everybody, I want to do one last thing before we all exit, which is I want to post a link to Forrest's book one last time. It is in the chat. So click on that or head to communitybookstore.net at some point, and we do have copies, and we're excited to be getting it out there. We're also open now, so we can hand you a book. That's exciting. So if you're in Brooklyn, come say hi. We'll still like not hug you, but we'll hand you a book. And otherwise, Elisa, Forrest, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. This has been super lovely.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.
Be well, be vaccinated soon, and we'll all hang out.
Okay.
All right. Good night.